Hey, Frog fans, welcome back to the Talking Frogs podcast, episode 7, coming to you from the Flying T studios here at Roxo Media House. I'm your host, Jamie Plunkett, and today I've got a really special guest, Tyler Olker, Director of Player Personnel for TCU Football. Tyler, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I really am glad to talk to you. I want to hear a little bit more about your journey to TCU, but before we get into that, I want to ask you a question about the spring game that just happened a couple weeks ago. We were standing there on the sideline. There were hundreds of recruits there, and we were looking around at the atmosphere. I want to hear from your perspective because I know you put a lot of work into making that day happen. What was it like just kind of seeing that day come to life for you?
Yeah, so, big part of what we do is obviously the scouting and evaluation of all these high school prospects and getting them on campus. So it's not really just a me thing. There's a whole team that kind of goes into it. We got our on-campus crew and Jeff and I and Joe doing the scouting and stuff. But it was just really good to see the numbers that we had, the people that are interested in coming to the game. Obviously, it was, a Friday night. Like you said, really good atmosphere. So it was good to see that those kids, signed up, came up to the game, whether they were invited, talked to their high school coach, whatever the case may be. But just getting kids on campus so that they can see TCU and just see kind of what we have to offer.
So Director of Player Personnel is heavily involved in recruiting. Mm-hmm. Is that pretty much the scope of your role?
Yeah. So I like to think of my role. So Jeff Jordan, he's our AD for personnel. Mm-hmm. I like to think of myself as like his personal ops person. Okay. I try to take as much stuff off of Jeff's plate so that he can scout and evaluate as many kids as possible. So I kind of just feel like I'm the glue that kind of keeps things together, and just kind of take on as much as I can.
Is that mostly administrative, or is that coordination and
a little bit of everything? I mean, it can be talking to high school coaches, it can be talking to prospects, it can be transcripts, transfer portal, internal with administration, whatever it may be, compliance, just whatever comes up, send it my way.
Sounds like it's a really important role.
Yeah,
right. To kind of keep the things going on, keep the train on the tracks, keep the clock running on time, any kind of metaphor.
Yeah, trying to like work ahead too, so like Jeff can be scouting and evaluating and I can be working on camps, and then when he gets to camps, I'm on to the next thing, whatever it may be, just trying to keep us organized and together.
Nice. So let's back up a little bit and hear, because I want to hear more about you. This is one of the really cool things about the new staff coming on board is that there's just a different level of access to folks now. This conversation wouldn't have happened 10 years ago to 6 months ago. And so I think folks really have enjoyed learning more about folks who mostly work behind the scenes and maybe aren't recognized as they should be for the work that they do. So talk a little bit about kind of your path to TCU, where you're from, where you went to school, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so kind of a little about me. I grew up in Illinois, super small school, or small town, small school as well. Spring Grove, Illinois. I went to Richmond Burton High School. Town of about 3,200 people. Oh, wow. So real small. I like I said, went to high school there. I played junior college ball at College of DuPage for 2 seasons. I was a qualifier, so I was able to get out of there at mid-year. I went to the University of Northern Colorado, which is where I played Division I ball, and did 2 seasons there, finished up my career. And when I finished, I knew I wanted to get into coaching. I wasn't sure if I wanted to exactly coach or just be in an off-the-field role. At an FCS level, they don't really have those off-the-field, roles. So I got in as an intern for my first semester in the spring. They had a GA leave, so I was able to kind of get in as a GA for that first fall. I GA'd with the linebackers, which was something that was really different for me. I played offensive line, and linebacker was a whole different deal. But I was able to learn a bunch, and I was the only graduate assistant that they had at the time.
Oh, wow.
So I was able to take on, and that's kind of where I think some of my role comes in today is – having been at an FCS school, I've had to wear a bunch of different hats and do a lot of different stuff throughout the year. So I did that year there. I got an interview at the University of Kansas when David Beatty got there. Yeah. And so I went from Northern Colorado to Kansas. I was at Kansas for 5 seasons, under David Beatty for 4, Les Miles for 1. And then I moved on to SMU, did 2 seasons there, and then came over here.
Is Les Miles as eccentric as he comes off?
He's everything he's made out to be. Yeah, he was awesome. He was a good dude to be around, and I'm thankful to have worked for him, and I learned a lot. But he is what he is.
Yeah. So you also worked with a couple current assistant coaches here when you were at Kansas. Doug Meacham, obviously, Frog fans have known him for a long time now, and AJ Ricker, the offensive line coach. So building those relationships that you built and kind of knowing at least two of the guys going to SMU,
right?
I guess Coach Ricker on your way to SMU, and then coming here, Meacham was another familiar face. How did that help you as you transitioned all the way from Northern Colorado to Kansas to SMU and now TCU?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of looking back at it, there was more than just those two guys. You know, it was Meacham, Ricker, Coach Riley, Jeff Jordan was there, Kenny Perry. Yeah, when he was at SMU, he obviously isn't over here, but and then when we got to SMU, Chidera Uzoduribe I'd worked with at Kansas. So there's just a bunch of connections back to Kansas, but I think it's helped the transition quite a bit because, you know, especially when I came in and they were already at SMU, I already knew those guys, so it made that kind of awkward, like, what am I getting myself into? What are these guys like? I kind of knew what to expect from those coaches.
And I'm assuming the same thing here. Yeah. Because, you know, I think we were talking one day, and the practices here are very similar to the structure and the setup that you guys had at SMU, right?
Yeah, I would say 80% of what we did at SMU, we've kind of just copied and pasted it over here, and we're trying to do a lot of the same things. Now, I think we've also had to evolve a little bit, going from a group of 5 to a power 5. A lot of people's roles have expanded a little bit. We've also been able to take on additional people to maybe take back from some of those roles. But I do think having familiarity, a lot of us having worked together before, has really helped this transition coming, you know, from SMU.
So you mentioned the group of 5 versus power 5. What's different about TCU in your experience so far than, say, from SMU? And I know Kansas is also power 5, but just different kind of program up there.
For
sure. What's different about TCU in your experience so far?
I would just say the day-to-day things, facilities, facility staff. There's a little bit more ease to getting things done. When you say or ask that you need something, it's usually like a snap of the fingers and it's done. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing. And it's really, you know, if we need 100 chairs and we need them set up with tables and stuff for a recruiting event, we're not the ones having to do it.
Gotcha.
You know, it's there's a staff there for that as well. So it's things like that you don't really think about that are beneficial to us.
Yeah. So what's something that you've learned now about TCU that you didn't know before you transitioned over?
So when I was at Kansas, we played here a couple times, and this might not be something I learned, but I always just we would come down here and play, and I never understood why it wasn't just a consistent powerhouse. And so kind of going back to as well what we've been trying to show these recruits, I guess, even having been in the conference before, I never knew what TCU had to offer. I knew that kids liked them in recruiting. I knew their stadium was cool because we played in it. But outside of that, you never really saw anything. So I guess really just seeing the facilities, seeing what they have to offer, the area of Fort Worth. I knew of Fort Worth, but I didn't really realize what all it had to offer. And I think that becomes then a big selling point of what we're trying to sell to these kids is it's a city, but it's a small town. And I think a lot of people kind of say that, but it's the truth. So probably just the Fort Worth aspect of TCU.
Nice. So it sounds like maybe there was a little bit of an exposure issue going on with the program.
I would say.
You know, just someone who's been around for a while, the facilities are absolutely there, kind of like you mentioned. The finances are pretty much there as well, on par with pretty much anyone except, you know, A&M, Texas, which they're ridiculous. And then, like you said, location. You know, every coach that I talk to mentions the location and mentions, you know, Fort Worth is a top 12, top 11 size city in the country, and yet it feels.
And I would have not known that.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1.5 million people almost, but it feels like you kind of know everybody.
Yeah, so that's been really awesome. You know, just everything about Fort Worth has been great. Obviously, proximity to get to Dallas and get prospects and get to Houston or just wherever in the state we're recruiting. You know, we're in a good pocket area to recruit from.
Yeah. So culturally too, it feels like things are starting to shift under Dykes a little bit. You know, just the openness, the accessibility has all been really cool to see. But one of the things that I've really enjoyed seeing is kind of the cross interaction of the student athletes.
Yeah.
You know, you have Eddie coming out to his spring practice, throwing the cleats on, catching some passes, that kind of thing. The whole football team showing up to support TCU basketball, and a lot of guys coming out to support TCU baseball as well.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the football staff has helped set a new culture for the athletic department, or do you think that they're kind of taking on the life of the culture around them?
I think probably a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think we probably had to set the table a little bit for some of our guys, because I don't know that it's necessarily been the way that it is now, where, hey, we should go support baseball or we should get over to the basketball game. Those guys probably went, and I don't want to speak, but they probably went on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now there's a little bit of like, we need to do this as a team. I think we've probably instilled some leadership aspects that may not have been there before. And so I think some guys are taking on those roles of like grouping up guys and getting them to go do things. And but it has been good to see, you know, like Eddie coming over from basketball, and some of the baseball guys have been over at practice and just kind of being a little bit more open and welcoming. You know, we've kind of talked about that from the get-go. Just we need to be inclusive to everybody.
Yeah.
So I think that's from admin all the way down to student athlete.
Excellent. I mean, I think that was a huge part of why Dykes got the offer.
Yeah.
Was because of how he turned things around at SMU. The whole staff over there,
Right.
really worked hard to turn that program around from.
And I think
kind of
just
the
that's
depths.
one of our big things as a staff, is just kind of being welcoming to the community. You've seen all the youth camps that we've been doing,
Yeah.
and things like that. We did a lot of that stuff over at SMU, and have brought that over here and just kind of started those guys out at a young age and kind of grown them into being, you know, TCU fans.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about those youth camps and recruiting. You guys had a youth camp over at Sprague over in Dallas, I believe last week, early this week.
This last weekend.
And so is that for you in your role an opportunity to is that community building? Are you maybe identifying kids even at that young of an age? Like if you see a guy who's really quick out there?
Yeah.
Is that
I would say it's more community building than anything.
Yeah.
Trying to bring, especially like those kids' parents, you know, involving them in TCU, and maybe they're donors, or maybe they come to a game now because they're at least invested. But it's the opportunity to get those kids a free shirt, get them working with our staff. You never know who may become a prospect down the road, but it's really just kind of a community thing more so than anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, especially when you look at Fort Worth versus Dallas and the kind of city rivalry, is that an intentional effort to get East a little bit more?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously we want to expand, and we are the only Big 12 team in DFW, and so we're going to take advantage of that. So yeah, I mean, we're going to expand over there. We're going to recruit there. We've done our youth camps there. We do donor events there. So just as much as we're doing stuff in Fort Worth, I think we're also, you know, touching base with Dallas.
How has I want to talk a little bit about high school recruiting too, but how much has high school recruiting changed because of the transfer portal?
I think a ton.
Yeah.
I think too, now you kind of have to see a kid in two lights. Like, is it somebody that is going to be interested in TCU now, or are they going to be interested in TCU maybe after they, as a transfer student? So you kind of have to pick and pull on, you know, what their thought process might be, and be realistic with yourself. If it's a kid that, you know, may not have interest now, you kind of have to recruit them and just stay afloat. And so when they do hit the transfer portal, or if they do hit the transfer portal, you have a chance to get in. There's also a little bit of like, do I need to offer this kid with the ability for him to transfer later and us take him? Is that going to, you know, play into his decision maybe later on? Wow. So there's a lot of different aspects that kind of go into that thought process.
So you're having conversations with kids where it's not even just we want you right now, but you know, even if you go somewhere else, keep in touch. We want you 2 years from now.
I think with everything that's going on with the transfer portal, you have to think about that stuff, and you might not be having that conversation with that kid now, but it's in the back of your mind as you're speaking with him, and as you're getting to know his family and his high school coach, and just what he might be doing with his recruiting. Thinking about kind of down the line a little bit.
So when again, this is where maybe folks don't know all about the specifics, the details of your role, but when coaches are out on the road and when they're recruiting, when they're talking to kids like they are right now at the time of recording this, they're kind of all scattered. Who kind of maps all of that out and determines which coach is going where? Is it relationship based? Is it area based?
So that's actually one of the things I'm working on right now. So like I said, Jeff does a large chunk of our evaluation. And so he's mapping out where all these kids are, should we offer them, where do they kind of rank on our boards and things like that. Well, then I take that aspect of what he's done, and I basically sit with a map, and I sit with, you know, the coaches' recruiting areas and our database, and I just start putting the weeks together for them. Nice. They'll, as we kind of get into it, things change. Kids fall off or they show up and they're not what we think they might be. So we don't have to send another coach to maybe go see them. But that's actually what I'm working on now. So we've been working on this for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Next week being the last week of it, and I usually touch base with these guys every night to try and figure out, okay, who did they actually get to? If things come up, they might get stuck at a high school for a little longer than they anticipated, which then means on the back end they didn't get to somewhere that they needed to get to. So just then making sure we're covered. So there's a lot of different aspects, and within the recruiting rules, only being able to have 2 coaches there at once, only being able to see a school twice. There's a lot of different intricate things that become difficult to track, but just trying to stay on top of all that stuff.
I was about to ask, how do you track? Do you just got a big spreadsheet or
Yeah, I have a huge spreadsheet of every prospect that we needed to see. And then, the first date we saw them, the second date we saw them, to make sure we covered those guys and didn't forget anybody. But then I've also got like a calendar of each coach's week and then the schools they go to in that day. So there's a couple different things to kind of cross layer there.
I think one of the things that Coach Dykes' staff was known for at SMU was kind of recruiting above their weight a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the guys that were committed that eventually flipped to TCU. I mean, those are some of the most highly rated recruits in the state,
right,
and in the country. Now that you guys are starting to establish yourselves at TCU, what is y'all's expectation for the level at which you're going to be able to recruit?
Yeah, I don't know that we sit there and we're like, hey, we got to have 8 4-stars committed in this class. It kind of just comes with the evaluation process and making sure we're doing the same things for every single kid and how we're evaluating them, getting them on campus, going out to see them, getting them on official visits, getting them to camp so we can work with them and they can work with us. I would say, obviously we're going to recruit a higher level of player, but I think that will just come. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think we have enough to offer academically. We have enough to offer locationally. And then, obviously we got to go out on the field and kind of put some stuff together. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the piece right now. We've got a little bit of momentum having been a new staff, but I think there's some kids that would probably jump in the boat right now, but they just don't know what to expect out of us yet. And so I think that's probably the next piece is just putting it together on the field so, guys feel comfortable.
Yeah, and that just comes with time at this point, right? You can't rush to get to August.
No.
So that's really cool, though, to see how quickly y'all have come in, established a new culture in the program, hit the ground running on recruiting. You've got a couple guys in the fold now. And then on the other side of that, Coach Dykes and the whole staff seems really intent and intentional about curating the transfer portal, seeing the guys that are in there, really evaluating them well. How much of your time these days is spent kind of balancing, all right, here's our high school list, and then we've got to really be focused and paying attention to the portal as well.
So that's kind of the nice thing about how we're set up, and I feel like we're pretty organized with this, is Jeff really handles a lot of the high school stuff. Jeff was a high school coach here for 28 years at Garland High. Joe Grills, he handles a lot of our JUCO recruiting.
Okay. And
then I'd manage most of the transfer portal stuff. So we all have kind of our majors and what we're looking for, so that there is a little bit of crossover, but for the most part, hey, this kid might have popped up. Are we sure he's on our list? And then they, somebody can come to me with it, or we all just kind of know what aspect we need to cover. So, Joe's kind of scooping for some of the JUCO guys right now, and Jeff's fighting for some of those 23s and 24s. And then, with the transfer portal deadline, things have drastically slowed down. Yeah. But there are still some guys trickling in.
So I was about to ask, when will that start to ramp up again? Will that ramp up late July, early August?
Yeah, it'll be, I think things kind of reset back in August. So, there's a couple guys still floating out there that had transferred before the deadline, but in terms of new names popping up, there really shouldn't be many. They'd have to have a special circumstance to be eligible. So at this point, I think things are, so to speak, done with that. So we'll just kind of recruit the guys that hit the portal beforehand.
So, you've already brought 13 portal guys in, 24/7 Sports. I don't know how much you pay attention to the rankings and the lists,
right.
But TCU, I think, was 9th on their transfer class list as far as strength or ratings or whatever. How many more people do you guys anticipate bringing in? Are you looking at specific position groups? When you're at this point in the year, kind of what's the strategy that you guys are employing?
Yeah, so right now it's kind of just dependent upon need. So we were able to fill quite a bit of our needs here in the last few weeks with defensive linemen and DBs and things like that. So I'd say there's probably 2 or 3 names still floating around out there, but there's not going to be anything drastic left in terms of changes and things that might happen. So we got a couple guys that we're still waiting on, and hopefully they make a decision here soon, and then they're here for summer session 1 and start working with Kaz.
Yeah, everybody heaps praise on Kaz. From your perspective, knowing him from SMU and now here, how integral is he to the program, and how much of a game changer is his program?
Yeah, I would say Kaz is the program.
Okay.
Kaz is kind of the heartbeat. He's the main cog. He makes everything go. He's kind of the temperament, the temperature. I don't know that there's anybody better at what he does in the country than him. He's so good with not only just the weightlifting development aspect, but he's so big into the mental aspect. And I haven't seen anybody handle a staff of underneath him like he does. Those guys are broken up specifically by position. They all lift specific lifts based on their position. He's got a plan for every single day. I would say every single word he says, he's thought through. So
wow.
He's as good as it gets, and I would praise him because he deserves it. He does a great job.
It almost seems logical that position groups would have customized workouts based on what muscles they needed to build,
right?
What they were going to be asked to do on the field. Is that not
I would say people do that to an extent, but I would say like the biggest thing is that for an example, some of our offensive linemen, they've played a lot of snaps. Mm-hmm. They may also lift a different position group, but they may do that lift differently.
Okay.
Like they might not get under the squat rack. They might go do, a cable squat, or just thinking through it that way they need to get done what they need to get done, but also take the load off of them so they're not stressing their body knowing that they may be a junior or senior, or they've taken X amount of snaps. So there's just a little bit more, I think, that goes into it on his end.
And he's super intentional about not even just by position group, but individual player.
Yeah, it's really individualized. And one thing I failed to mention was just nutrition and how big he is on that. And from everything I've heard from guys on the team, that's been a drastic improvement since we've been here. Is just getting them food. They're eating at least twice a day with us, plus whatever nutritional snacks we provide post lift and things, and then we've got some mucho and different things that we're able to provide them. So just getting them food and getting them water and simple things.
I mean, we've seen the results of all of that just by how much bigger everybody is. I mean, even Chandler Morris, I think it said he almost gained 20 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, he can afford to do that. He's a pretty small guy. But, talking about like D Winters up to 230.
He looks really thick already.
He looks legit.
Yeah.
You've got Marcel Brooks, who's up to like 210 now. All of these guys who maybe played a little bit underweight now at weight.
Right.
What does that do just mentally for a kid when they know that, there's, because of the nutrition, because of the workout program, because of the things that they've been doing physically and mentally, that maybe the risk of injury is a little bit lower, and that they're playing at a good weight.
Yeah, I think it's all that. I mean, I just, as I mentioned before, Kaz's big thing is, one of his big things is mental aspect of things. And I think just going into a game knowing, you're at the most physical shape you've ever been in, or you're as fast as you've ever been. But I also think the nutrition aspect of things kind of goes into the recovery and things that he works towards. So his big thing is kind of injury prevention. So I don't think we've ever stretched. I've been a part of more stretching in the last 2 years than I think I've ever been a part of, but it's been beneficial because we really haven't had nearly as many injuries probably as some other teams. So it's been beneficial in what he does.
I mean, it feels like as long as I've been covering TCU, there was always at least one significant injury in the spring. Whether it was a defensive lineman stepping on a sprinkler head and busting his foot, or just whatever it might be, it always felt like there was at least one. And then throughout the season, it was probably 3-4 years ago at this point, I put together a whole chart of all the guys that got hurt throughout the season and the week in which they got hurt, because at the end of the year, it was 35, 40 guys that had sustained injuries to the point where they missed 3 or more games, or they were out for the entire season.
Right.
And TCU fans always ask questions about, is this happening at the same rate in other schools? What's going on?
Yeah.
But it really does feel like with the new staff in place, with the new strength and conditioning staff, that the intentionality with which you guys are focused on that is going to we're going to see a dramatic drop, which I think is really cool, just from a guy who,
Yeah, and I think, kind of just continuing to hit on Cause, one of his big things is get the work done that needs to be done in practice, but get those guys to the game. They're good enough athletes. They need to use the week to recover. Mm-hmm. Make sure that they mentally know what they need to do in the game, and they've ran those routes in practice. But we don't need to be beating ourselves up in practice because you're not winning any games there. Yeah. So his big thing is just kind of get them mentally prepped, get them recovered, and get them to the game.
How big is that aspect of things when it comes to the recruiting pitch?
Yeah, I think that, and actually I was talking to Josh Hoover, mm-hmm. and originally he was committed to Indiana. We were sitting in the office one day, and I was just kind of like, what would you have changed in your recruiting? And this was prior to spring, so he hadn't even had a chance to work with any of our coaches. And he said, I had no idea how much time you spend with your strength and conditioning coach. And so he was just saying, if I would have went back in my recruiting, I would have just tried to spend more time talking to strength and conditioning coaches in that part of recruiting. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think we can just continue to put value behind strength and conditioning.
Does that kind of feedback change what you guys are doing when kids are on campus?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with as big of a key piece as Kaz is, like he's around in recruiting.
He's already front and center.
Yeah, he's talking to kids, so he's really good with that stuff. So I'd say for us, we kind of already went into recruiting knowing he's going to be a big piece of it. But I would say, you got to keep him involved and keep strength and conditioning involved through all that.
Okay. Can't let you get out of here without talking about NIL.
Okay.
Because it is front and center today. Yeah. It's this new era of college football where I was talking about this with Ian Sadler a couple episodes mm-hmm. ago. It's all about access. It's all about big dollar numbers.
Yeah.
Everybody's seeing the big dollar signs that guys are signing with, whether it's Quinn Ewers with the $1 million that he got out of high school, or Nigel Pack, the point guard from Kansas State, who just took $800K from Miami for the next 2 years. But when you're kind of at the ground level like you are, when you're talking to high schoolers on a daily basis and evaluating the transfer portal and just doing the level of work that you do, how frequently does NIL come up? And are you ever the one that kind of initiates that part of the conversation?
Luckily, me personally haven't had to deal with it a ton. Okay. I think when it kind of gets to that point, I try to hand it off. Mm-hmm. And we've got some people that kind of talk through those things. So I really haven't had to deal with it a ton outside of, reading articles where, a kid's going to hit the portal and he wants to just test his market value, and then maybe he's going to come back to school, or maybe he's going to take that. I would also say that some of that stuff is a little bit of a red flag for us too.
Okay.
So, just sifting through what's real and what's not is probably my extent of it. Now, obviously, I understand we're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. I would also say, you kind of talked about marketing and how we can kind of help our student athletes, Anthony Crespino, Jason Andrews, some of those guys who work in the creative realm of TCU football. I would say we put more content out there probably than anybody in the Big 12. That's my belief.
Yeah.
They're very personal with those guys, and I think that provides them an opportunity to maybe get seen by some of these collectives or whoever may be providing NIL financials. But I would say that's probably my extent.
So when you say red flags, does that prevent you from having a conversation with a kid, or is that something that you're going to make sure to ask about when you talk to a kid?
I would just say it's something to kind of keep in your mind. I try to think about kind of how Jeff and I evaluate. We're not really bringing kids to the table as much as we are trying to take them off the table and make sure we're taking the right kids. So
gotcha.
Just making sure we have all the information when we're going to talk to kids or talk to their high school coach, that we are taking the right kids, because we are really trying to build a good nucleus of guys. I think we have a great nucleus core already. So just making sure we're not bringing anybody in that may disturb that.
So, I think Dyke said after the spring game, you guys had anywhere between 500, 750 recruits on campus throughout the spring. Does that pace stay the same in the fall? Does it pick up? Does it slow down? Or is it just kind of play it as it comes?
Hit or miss. I would say with the spring, obviously we had a ton of kids on campus. I think there's a lot of that is because we're a new staff. A lot of that is because we put a huge emphasis on reaching out to high school coaches and getting kids on campus because of the access piece we kind of talked about earlier. If I don't know what they've seen before, then they've probably not seen this place. So it was really just kind of opening up the doors to TCU and, hey, this is what we have to offer. You know, we may not be recruiting you now, but we might be in a year from now. So that kind of deal is just getting them on campus. Now in the fall, it won't necessarily be during the week as much or for practice. With us being a morning team and kids having school and things, you know, from day to day, it'll probably slow down. But we'll have more kids on campus for games and things like that. Now you're going to be combating other schools because they're also going to be playing probably the same day as you. So there's a little bit of that. So it'll probably slow down a little bit. But spring is a good time to get eyes on kids, kind of visually evaluate them while they're on your campus, make sure that they see your things, and then get them over to camps.
When we look, because you mentioned that you guys were starting to look at class of 23, obviously 24, and I'm sure you've got 25 guys on the list as well, maybe even 26 if they're, you know, which I think what those
there might be
like
one or
14
two
years old at this point. But when you start to look at the future of the Big 12 conference too, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving after 2025, you've got Central Florida and Cincinnati and Houston coming in 2023. How does that change things for you as just in your role? And how does that change maybe how the coaches pitch TCU when they're out on the road?
The way we would look at it is probably just from like an evaluation standpoint. I don't know necessarily that our recruiting footprint is going to change as much. I think we'll probably stay the same. I don't know that necessarily changes. I would say the one thing that's going to be up for grabs, and we feel like we're in a good spot, is with Texas and OU leaving. You know, OU's kind of been the perennial powerhouse of the Big 12. Well, that's kind of up for grabs now. Yeah. And, you know, Oklahoma State, Baylor, they've been really successful over the last few years. So putting ourselves up there with them, and, you know, we feel like if we can continue to kind of recruit DFW really, really hard, you know, that success will come. So I think it's just getting the right players in here, getting the top players locally here, winning football games. That'll put us kind of at the top of the Big 12. At least that would be my perspective.
What's the potential for that? Getting on top.
I think, you know, the way the players we have now currently, we're going to be okay. We feel good about the nucleus, the core guys that we're in here now. We're going to continue to add to that. I think the one thing that's going to be awesome to see is just, and you can do the research on it, but just the success that Coach Dykes has had at quarterback. Yeah. If we can get the right quarterback in here and he can move the ball, we're going to be okay. You know, I haven't been around anybody defensively as good as Gillespie. Yeah. You know, he is one of the nicest human beings. He is so down to earth. He is so good at what he does. And I think that the defense he runs is going to be specific. Obviously, we had trouble with it a little bit at SMU, and that's part of the reason why he's here. We couldn't beat him, so we said, come on. Yeah. But, you know, I think those two things, Coach Riley, Coach Gillespie, Coach Dykes, and Coach Riley's quarterback success, I think you pair those two things together, as long as we do, you know, what we think we can do, we should be successful.
I think that's, you know, music to every Horned Frog fan's ears after the last couple of years of struggling. But, you know, Tyler, I really do appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Before you get out of here, though, what do you think about the digs?
Yeah, this place is awesome. Appreciate you having me out. This is cool. I'm sure at some point I'll hopefully be back here.
Yeah, man, you're welcome here anytime.
This thing is well on the way, so it looks awesome.
Well, I appreciate you coming by. Frog fans, just remember that you can find Talking Frogs podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can get the video version on the Frogs Today YouTube channel. And don't forget, frogstoday.com is there for the taking. It's just $1 right now for the first 30 days. If you sign up, you can come on, hang out in the Lizard Lounge with me, Melissa Treebwasser, Jeff Wilson, Brian Estridge, and the rest of the crew, talking about all the rumors and news of the day regarding TCU athletics. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like. That helps the algorithm out, and I'm not too shameless to ask for that. Tyler, again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Appreciate you having me.
Frog fans, we'll talk to you next time. Go Frogs.